Hello, and welcome to F1 Into the Barrier with me, George Close, reviewing the Brazilian Grand Prix. A sprint weekend, a lot of crashes, and it has resulted in Lando Norris 24 points, ahead of his teammate at the top of the championship in the 2025 season. It's coming to an end. We've got 3 races left after this, but Sao Paulo, yes, a sprint weekend. Lots to cover, and I think we can start with none other than Oscar Piastri, who has been slipping. He's not been on the best form. And the first slip came in the sprint race, where he got a little bit too much front left wheel on the curb. Lando Norris had actually done a similar level of curb the lap before, but on the next lap, in changing conditions, a bit of wet heat, stayed off the curbs, which is a sensible thing to do. But Oscar Piastri pushing, went on the curbs, hit a bit of water, lost some front grip definitely, and spun into the barrier. We then had very quickly Nico Hülkenberg and Colapinto go into the barrier. Fun fact on Colapinto, actually, he's just been given a new contract to Alpine, so no more Jack doing. Don't think Jack was probably good enough to hang around, but Colapinto's performance has been a little bit iffy himself, but he's got a lot of very good sponsors behind him, so we will be seeing Franco next season, maybe crashing out into some more barriers. But Oscar Piastri, it wasn't the worst points deficit to lose, but in a battle this close with Lando Norris, your teammate, and also Max Verstappen catching up, although Max might be out of it now, it was disastrous. And he also had qualifying a few hours later, and you've got to let your team rebuild the car in that time. Really not what you wanted. And you saw Lando Norris, who had nailed qualifying again. Nailed sprint quali, he nailed qualifying, but in sprint quali, nailed him. Went on to win that sprint race. And then we come to Oscar Piastri in the main race. Now, first up, they all at the front got away reasonably well. But when it comes to the restart, Oscar Piastri, Antonelli, and Charles Leclerc end up 3 abreast. Now, this is interesting. Live, I thought it was a slam dunk Oscar penalty. Why did I think that? Because of all the smoke from the lockup, and we didn't get to see too many replays. I have slightly changed my mind. I've seen some good analysis by Jamie Chadwick and Corinne Chandler, and I'm starting to agree with them a bit more. If you look at them as the 3 cars come up, Oscar is clearly far enough alongside. Remember, front axle, wing mirror of the other car. Now, this is interesting. He gets further alongside than that. And actually, if you think about it, where a head isn't just perpendicular to the track at all times because of the nature of some of these corners. So arguably, he's at least alongside. I don't think you'd ever say he's ahead, but Charles is also really far along on the outside. Now, because he's a bit conservative with braking, actually, I think he brakes earlier than Antonelli. He does actually drop back behind that wing mirror mark. So on the strict reading of the guidelines we went through last week, he's no longer far enough alongside to deserve room. Now, that feels a bit harsh, right? Is there something about this which feels wrong? He's just been far enough alongside. Yes, there's a coming up to the apex. He's going to make the corner. I don't think anyone doubts he's going to make the corner. So maybe a little wiggle room. So people saying, oh, the guidelines are too strict. There is guidance points actually to allow them some flex there. So I'm not quite as critical on them as maybe others. The next part is the lockup itself. Why does that happen? Now, Jamie Chadwick points out that Antonelli actually had a bit more room on the outside. And that's very tricky. These things, we're talking right now for minutes about this, and it goes through in a matter of seconds how fast these cars are. But there's more room there because Charles Leclerc's left more room. And Antonelli is a little bit optimistic, actually, that race line. He knows, he's seen him on the left, he's seen him in the wing mirror, and also he knows that Oscar's there and going to be lunging. And Oscar, I think, actually probably is entitled to go for the space. I don't think it's awful. And the reason you have the lockup is because when he sees Antonelli coming across him, he obviously doesn't want the contact, doesn't want his race to be over. So he slams on the brakes and locks up his front right tyre. The other element to the guidelines is whether the stewards think he could have reasonably made the corner. I think that's pretty clear. You actually see how tight he is to the apex. Not that it's always that important, but you see, particularly in a 3-to-1 situation, I think that is important. He's very close. So a little bit hard done by. How do I think it should have been solved? Probably a racing incident. I think the tricky, because Charles was the innocent bystander and got knocked out of the race, he's the one who's not done anything and ended up with the greatest punishment. So could actually have been a bit of fault to both Antonelli and Piastri. They could have both got 5 seconds. It could have been put as a racing incident. I don't think we want to penalise drivers going for those gaps and actually being able to be in control of their car enough. Now, there is the fully in control point, and he does lock up, but I think he is fully in control of the car up to the point that Antonelli doesn't leave him enough room. So I put a little bit more on Antonelli, I think, but given that the way that we're measuring far enough alongside, I think it's harsh, so I'd go with Racing Instant. There you go. You've got it out of me. I've worked there myself. Next up, let's talk about Max's super drive. He replicated some of the form from last year. That wet drive last year, though, I think was superior to this one. Obviously, this one he did start in the pit lane because he'd had a terrible weekend. He'd had a write-off weekend really up to that point, hadn't he? And qualifying on Sunday, that was just abysmal. Utterly abysmal. Still out-qualified Tsunoda, though, but abysmal. But they took the opportunity. They replaced the PU unit in the car. They rolled back some of the aero. And what you ended up with, undoubtedly, was that really quick in a straight line, slippery Red Bull. And in a track where you can only overtake in 2 DRS zones, so turn 1, turn 4, and then you can drag to the line outside the final turn, that's a pretty useful thing to have. That's why Ferrari, I don't think, were very good either, and particularly a lot of other cars were terrible at getting past one another. But Max, even though they started from the pit lane, they had the very, very early safety car and then virtual safety car. And unlike the cars in front, he can make use of that and be really aggressive on the tyres. Now, he did get that slow puncture, so that is a really interesting thing to think about because he did lose some significant time there. But the nature of the race, the timing of the pit stops, obviously lended itself that he could start picking off these cars one by one, and he always had the overspeed. He's a very good driver. I think he's still in the best form I've seen him in this year, definitely with qualifying, and we're seeing him be able to go forward competitively, aggressively. He doesn't hang around. Also, little small things like he would break the toe in that run down to turn 4, where other drivers don't necessarily think of that. You can weave to break the toe to stop the cars coming back. I don't think they really would have come back, most of the cars, but that little detail we're seeing from Max at the moment, I think is very good. And undoubtedly, he's really quick when it comes to qualifying. No, this wasn't his best weekend, but he's really quick there. We've seen it this season. And going forward, he's very, very good, very aggressive. Sometimes he gets it wrong, particularly when he lunges down the inside. And I think there are problems with the late lunge on the interpretation of the driving standards. He's not very good going backwards, but he's not had to go backwards much recently, has he? He's not had to go backwards very much. On Yuki, his attempt at trying to overtake up one of the corners I didn't just state was crazy, and he deserved this penalty. Red Bull then compounded it by them messing up the pit stop for him, where they have to not touch the car for 10 seconds. I almost wondered if it was deliberate. It was just so ridiculous. It would only happen to Tsunoda in that team. Racing Bulls, they're family friends. Yes, the Racing Bulls. They are incredible. Just wonderfully how little effort and resistance they put into Max. I did enjoy. But Liam Lawson, one-stop strategy. 7th. He did 52 laps on that set of tyres. Quite remarkable. Hadja and him ended up touching on the final lap. We didn't get to see it live, but Isaacs owned up and said it was his mistake. Thankfully, they didn't have any further ramifications from that. But 7th and 8th, Hadja's race was ruined from his strategy, really. His pit stop pissed him into traffic and kind of ruined his race. Wasn't the best of timings by Racing Bulls. And that means we get to come on to Ferrari. You've dropped from 2nd to 4th in the Constructors. They've had a very vocal senior president coming out telling Charles and Lewis to get on with racing and less talk. Lewis had a miserable weekend. He had that good start in the sprint race, didn't he? And got very quickly behind Leclerc. But ultimately, just dismal. Another dismal qualifying performance. Having had a few weeks where he seemed a lot closer to Charles, you actually saw that performance gap open up again. It was a bit of a crap car, looked quite slow. I mean, Charles obviously did have opportunities, and I think Charles is over qualifying that car, so he would have gone backwards. But it feels very Vettel at the moment for Lewis, feels very Vettel at Ferrari, where he's come from another team which has much better protocols. With Lewis next year, if they can get the build right to do something special, but every team has that same opportunity, and there's no guarantee that's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, and Lewis keeps up this similar level of performance, I think it could end sour. But Lewis is quite good at self-motivating. It's just how much tolerance do he have? And I think the Ferrari garage will have less than he does, just knowing Ferrari over the years, if we're all honest. Where he went into the back of Bortoletto, misjudged that, trying to come out the slipstream, mistakes you wouldn't normally see. Wasn't a great look. Definitely think he slept worst of all the drivers on Sunday night. Well, let's talk about Bortoletto. He had his huge sprint crash and not a very good home Grand Prix weekend. Another crash in the race, this time being too optimistic on the outside, in the middle sectors. His crash was interesting because I'd seen a video recently of Mika Häkkinen's crash in 1995 at Adelaide, where he has that huge sideways motion, hits his head on the car at 120 miles an hour, and he fractured his skull and was in a coma. It's amazing that he went on to win 2 championships after that, but he's always said it played a factor in his decision to retire early. But that crash where he hits his head, I think if you look at the Bortoleto crash without the new modern safety regulations where they sit lower and the extra neck bracing, I think it would have been very similar actually. And it just shows you, again, how impressive safety is in modern Formula One, because that was a huge crash. He had the DRS open, so not great. Bit of driver error in there. Hulkenberg and Behrman have definitely, in my opinion, been the standout performance of the second half of the season, or definitely the final third. Hadjar had as well, has an argument to be in there, but I think this final third, Behrman keeps finding himself high up in the race on Sunday and is having good qualifying performances, and Hulkenberg as well. Hulkenberg did spin out, as I say, in the sprint race, but he had that amazing overtake in the main race on Albon. I thought it was a really nice overtake around in turn 1. Which brings us to Kimi Antonelli. I don't often speak about Kimi Antonelli in positive light, but this is his second podium of the year. He got third in Canada. Both races which he hadn't raced at before, which is a bit curious, but he out-qualified George in both the sprint and the race here, which is very hard to do. I think that's the first time I remember seeing a strong, full weekend performance from Kimi Antonelli. And in the race, he managed to hold, as I say, a bit of blame for the incident with Piastri, perhaps. But when he came under pressure from Max, he held it. He was putting in quick lap times, did what he needed to do. I thought it was good, because whilst Max's tyres were dropping off and it was obviously becoming harder for him, you could see that, there was still a threat there. And I think other drivers, not the top caliber drivers, would have been victim to Max there. And he didn't fall. So I think he can now start to feel like he belongs at the front. More performances like that from Kimi Antonelli, and they're hard to do when you've got George Russell as your teammate. But I think he's put that contract talk to bed. Which brings us to our super pole man, Lando Norris. Incredible. It's the qualifying that has managed to wrestle the championship back to him, and his amazing ability to stay out the front and win. And I've spoken about it so many times. Staying out in the front, leading from the front is a skill in itself. Knowing how to manage gaps, knowing when to push, just being quick in fresh air, not getting stuck in traffic. All of these things, restarts. He had to deal with some restarts over the course of the weekend. He was really, really on it, and it's championship performances. And those are the things, for me, that factor in and make a world champion. We're seeing a bit from Oscar earlier in the season, but if we reflect on it, Lando actually did keep Oscar reasonably honest sometimes. Obviously, there were performances, but in qualifying, you would see pole third, pole second. This was pole and fourth place. That's already a huge jump up that Piastri's got to do. Lando put the foot down, got out ahead. Quick pit stops from McLaren as well. And a lot of other teams, a lot of very quick pit stops, but they didn't buckle under the pressure, and he comes home 24 points in the championship. And it's incredible how the tide can turn, because there was a moment where it felt like Max could just keep winning till the end of the year. It felt like that Red Bull package had come alive. And when they faltered, one of the McLarens has come forward. That's Lando Norris. Is that enough to see Max Verstappen out of the championship? I think certainly not, because these two are going to be racing close. DNFs, I think, could still play a huge factor in the final 3 races of the year. And I'll see you next time, therefore, Marshals, in Las Vegas. 3 races, all to play for. Really exciting. Hopefully some more crashing out into the barrier. Catch you next time.